Cumberland Gap, Kentucky, 1884. While every settler rushed to build standard fireplaces against their cabin walls before winter, Scottish immigrant Duncan MacLeod was still positioning stones in late October. His neighbors called it structural madness. They called him a fool. MacLeod angled his fireplace at exactly 45 degrees to both corner walls, a position that seemed to waste space and defy frontier logic. He used 40% more stone than necessary, extending thermal mass 18 inches into each adjacent wall. Samuel Wright, the settlement's most experienced builder, shook his head watching MacLeod work. Fireplace goes on the wall proper, not hanging in space like some half-built mistake. Tom Bradley, the region's expert mason, dismissed it as Highland ignorance unsuited to Kentucky winters. Then January 12, 1885 arrived. Temperatures plunged to 18 below zero and stayed there for 23 straight days, the killing cold that would claim 31 lives across 3 counties. Standard fireplaces failed catastrophically. Families burned furniture to stay alive. Wright's family nearly froze using 3 cords of wood in 10 days. But MacLeod's strange angled fireplace? It kept his cabin at 68 degrees while burning half the wood his neighbors consumed. His thermal mass heated the entire cabin evenly, stone walls staying warm to the touch 12 hours after the fire died. What did this Highland stonemason understand about heat storage and corner positioning that frontier experts had completely missed? If you value stories of practical wisdom that stood the test of time, make sure to subscribe. We've got more documented accounts worth remembering. Duncan MacLeod knelt in the October mud. His measuring cord stretched taut between 2 cabin walls that met at exactly 90 degrees. The hemp rope formed a perfect diagonal across the corner, marking where most men would never think to build. Behind him, the sound of Samuel Wright's hammer stopped mid-swing. Wright had been splitting shingles for his own cabin roof, but curiosity pulled him toward MacLeod's peculiar construction site. "Duncan, that's the damnedest thing I've seen," Wright called out, wiping sweat from his forehead despite the cool autumn air. Fireplace goes on the wall or in the corner proper, not hanging in space like some half-built mistake. Wright had spent 12 years building cabins across Ohio and Kentucky, and he'd never seen a man mark a fireplace position that touched 2 walls but belonged to neither. MacLeod didn't look up from his measurements. His weathered hands, scarred by 15 years of Highland stonework, adjusted the cord until it bisected the corner at exactly 45 degrees. "In Sutherland we built for heat, not for looks," he replied in his thick Scottish brogue. "Stone holds fire's warmth long after flame dies. Corner gives you 2 walls to hold that heat instead of 1. Wright shook his head and returned to his shingles. Across the settlement clearing, Klaus Weber looked up from his own foundation work. The German immigrant had heard the exchange and found himself wondering if MacLeod's method resembled something his grandfather had mentioned about Bavarian heating systems. But Weber kept his thoughts to himself. Frontier wisdom meant following proven American methods, not experimenting with foreign ideas that might cost a family their lives come winter. By late October, MacLeod's design had drawn the attention of Tom Bradley, the region's established mason who'd built chimneys and fireplaces across 3 counties since 1878. Bradley arrived at MacLeod's worksite carrying his level and square, tools that had earned him respect as the authority on proper stone construction. What he saw made him frown with professional disapproval. The Scotsman had excavated a foundation that extended 18 inches into each adjacent wall, creating a massive stone platform that seemed to consume the cabin's interior space. The firebox itself would angle 22.5 degrees toward the room's center, a position Bradley had never encountered in his 6 years of regional experience. Most troubling was the sheer volume of stone MacLeod intended to use, over 4,000 pounds of native sandstone that would cost the settler nearly 40% more in materials and labor than a standard wall-mounted design. Man's wasting near 40% more stone than needed and putting that firebox where it can't heat worth a damn, Bradley told Wright and Weber that evening at the settlement's informal gathering. Highland methods don't work in Kentucky winters. I've built 63 fireplaces in this region, and everyone sits proper against the wall where it belongs. MacLeod continued his work undeterred by the community's skepticism. Each morning, he and his 16-year-old son, James, selected sandstone from the creek bed, choosing pieces that would hold heat longer than the limestone most builders preferred. The Highland tradition demanded specific stone qualities, density, grain structure, and thermal retention properties that James was learning to identify by touch and weight. While neighbors built their fireplaces in 3 days using standard patterns, MacLeod spent 2 weeks carefully angling each stone to create the precise geometry his design required. "Why do we build it this way, Da?" James asked as they set the firebox angled walls. The teenager had been born in Kentucky but raised on Highland building knowledge, making him fluent in both American frontier skepticism and Scottish thermal engineering. MacLeod pointed to the stone mass extending into the cabin's corner walls. "See how the fire will sit? When flame burns, heat hits both wall masses at the same time. Standard fireplace heats one wall poorly, loses most warmth up the chimney. Our way stores heat in 4,000 pounds of stone, then gives it back slow through the night." He demonstrated with his hands, showing how radiant heat would reflect off the angled firebox into the room while simultaneously warming the thermal masses built into both corner walls. As November approached, the settlement's established builders grew more vocal in their criticism. Wright calculated that MacLeod's excessive stonework had cost him 3 weeks of construction time that could have been spent preparing firewood or winterizing other aspects of his cabin. Weber wondered aloud whether the angled design might create dangerous draft problems that could fill the cabin with smoke. Bradley declared the entire project a waste of good stone that would prove inadequate when real cold arrived. The mathematical precision of MacLeod's work, however, told a different story. His firebox opening measured exactly 36 inches wide by 24 inches tall, angled to reflect 73% of the fire's radiant heat into the living space, rather than the 45% achieved by wall-mounted designs. The thermal mass extended precisely 18 inches into each adjacent wall, creating a heat storage system that could retain warmth equivalent to 2.5 hours of active burning. The chimney drew with 15% better efficiency due to the corner position's natural airflow advantages, ensuring cleaner burns and reduced wood consumption. On November 15, 1884, MacLeod completed his fireplace installation while his neighbors finished their standard wall-mounted designs. The first snow began falling that evening, light flakes that promised the testing season ahead. Samuel Wright stopped by MacLeod's cabin to examine the completed work, running his hands along the angled stone surfaces that seemed to belong neither to wall nor corner, but somehow to both. "Let's see how Duncan's sideways contraption works when real cold hits," Wright told Klaus Weber as they walked back to their own cabins. Neither man could imagine that within 2 months, MacLeod's strange design would become the difference between survival and death for half the families in Cumberland Gap. December brought the first serious test of Cumberland Gap's heating systems, and the results began separating theory from performance in ways that surprised even the most confident builders. Samuel Wright's wall-mounted fireplace, constructed according to 12 years of frontier experience, required constant feeding to maintain interior temperatures above freezing during the coldest nights. By mid-December, Wright had burned through 6 cords of split oak and hickory, watching his carefully prepared winter fuel supply diminish faster than expected. 3 cabins south, Duncan MacLeod's angled fireplace performed with mechanical precision that defied frontier logic. Each evening, MacLeod built his fire using the same 2 armloads of hardwood that his neighbors considered barely adequate for an hour's warmth. But where standard fireplaces lost most of their heat up the chimney and through single-wall radiation, MacLeod's corner position created a thermal engine that captured and redistributed energy with Highland efficiency. The physics became visible on the coldest December mornings. Klaus Weber noticed it first, walking past MacLeod's cabin at dawn, when temperatures had dropped to 8 degrees below zero. While every other cabin in the settlement showed thick ice formations on the interior surfaces of their windows, MacLeod's glass remained clear, a sign that interior temperatures stayed warm enough to prevent condensation from freezing. Weber mentioned this observation to Tom Bradley, who dismissed it as coincidence until he witnessed the phenomenon himself during a particularly brutal cold snap that lasted 4 days. MacLeod's thermal mass system operated according to principles his Highland ancestors had refined through 3 centuries of fuel scarcity and brutal winters. During active burning, the angled firebox reflected radiant heat simultaneously into both corner wall masses, storing thermal energy in over 4,000 pounds of sandstone. The stone absorbed heat slowly during the evening burn, then released it gradually throughout the night, maintaining comfortable temperatures 8 to 12 hours after the last flame died to coals. By Christmas, the mathematical differences had become undeniable. MacLeod had consumed exactly 4 cords of firewood while maintaining interior temperatures that allowed his family to work comfortably in shirt sleeves, even during the coldest weather. Wright had burned 8 cords to achieve interior temperatures that barely reached 45 degrees on the coldest nights, requiring his family to sleep in layers and share body warmth for survival. Weber's consumption fell between these extremes at 6.5 cords, but his cabin suffered from the hot and cold zones typical of wall-mounted fireplaces, scorching heat within 3 feet of the hearth, near freezing temperatures in the cabin's far corners. The thermal dynamics became a source of growing curiosity among the settlement's more observant residents. MacLeod demonstrated the principles to his son James each evening, showing how to test the stone wall's heat retention by placing a bare hand against the thermal mass at different times after the fire had died. 8 hours after banking the coals, the stone remained noticeably warm to the touch, still radiating stored heat into the cabin's living space. Standard fireplaces, constructed with minimal stone mass against single walls, lost their heat within 3 hours of the fire dying, forcing families to maintain active burning throughout the night or accept interior temperatures that could drop below freezing. Tom Bradley found himself studying MacLeod's design with grudging professional interest. The mason's expertise told him that the angled position should create draft problems and uneven heating, but the measurable results contradicted his assumptions. During a visit to discuss spring construction projects, Bradley observed MacLeod's fireplace in operation, noting how the corner draft created superior airflow that burned wood more completely and produced less smoke than his own wall-mounted designs. "I'll grant the design has merit," Bradley admitted to Wright during their weekly discussion of settlement affairs. "But it's overcomplicated for frontier building. Takes too much time, too much stone, too much precision measuring. Most settlers can't afford the extra materials or the construction delays." Bradley's professional pride prevented him from fully acknowledging that MacLeod's primitive Highland methods demonstrated superior engineering, but the performance data was becoming impossible to ignore. Wright began asking technical questions about thermal mass calculations and heat retention principles. His practical nature recognized that MacLeod's system provided tangible advantages: reduced wood consumption, more even heating, and interior comfort that eliminated the need for nighttime fires. But Wright also understood frontier economics. His family had allocated 12 cords for winter heating based on standard fireplace consumption rates. MacLeod's efficiency meant Wright had overprepared by nearly 50%, representing weeks of unnecessary labor and valuable timber that could have been used for other purposes. The broader implications troubled Wright's frontier sensibilities. If MacLeod's Highland techniques proved superior to established American methods, what other primitive European knowledge had frontier builders dismissed as obsolete? Wright had spent 12 years perfecting construction methods that prioritized speed and material economy over thermal performance. Assuming that American innovations automatically surpassed Old World practices, MacLeod's success suggested that traditional knowledge tested through centuries of harsh conditions might contain engineering wisdom that frontier expertise had overlooked. Klaus Weber experienced similar philosophical discomfort. His grandfather had mentioned European heating systems that used massive stone construction and strategic positioning to maximize fuel efficiency, but Weber had dismissed these stories as outdated methods unsuited to American abundance of timber and materials. Now he watched MacLeod achieve heating results that Weber's hybrid German-American techniques couldn't match, despite using construction methods that Weber had considered wastefully complex. Old-timer Jonathan Morse, who'd survived the brutal winter of 1856 that killed 12 people across 3 counties, stopped by MacLeod's cabin in late December to examine the Highland design. Morse had witnessed how standard heating methods failed during extended periods of extreme cold, and he recognized warning signs in the current weather patterns that suggested a similar test might be approaching. "Weather's got that feel," Morse told MacLeod while studying the angled fireplace. "Same kind of pressure, same wind patterns we had before the killing cold of 56. If we get another winter like that one, your heating system might be the difference between living and dying for more folks than just your family." January 12th, 1885, arrived with a silence that experienced frontiersmen recognized as dangerous. The morning temperature read 18 degrees below zero on Samuel Wright's mercury thermometer, and by noon it had dropped another 4 degrees despite brilliant sunshine. Jonathan Morse's weather predictions proved devastatingly accurate as an Arctic air mass settled over Kentucky with the persistence of a geological formation, trapping the Cumberland Gap region in a cold that would not break for 23 consecutive days. By the third day, Wright's heating system began failing in ways that threatened his family's survival. His wall-mounted fireplace, designed according to standard frontier practices, created a scorching zone within 3 feet of the hearth, while leaving the cabin's far corners at temperatures that froze water solid. Wright found himself burning 3 cords of split oak in 10 days, consuming his winter fuel supply at a rate that would leave his family without heat by February. The fireplace's single-wall thermal mass lost its stored heat within hours of the fire dying, forcing Wright to maintain active burning 20 hours per day to prevent interior temperatures from dropping below 20 degrees. Klaus Weber faced similar mechanical failures as his hybrid German-American design proved inadequate for sustained extreme conditions. The limestone he'd used for his fireplace's thermal mass cracked under the stress of rapid heating and cooling cycles, creating gaps that reduced heating efficiency by an estimated 30%. Weber's pregnant wife, Maria, developed early signs of frostbite on her fingers, despite staying within 6 feet of their actively burning fireplace. The cabin's interior temperature averaged 32 degrees during the coldest nights, requiring the family to sleep fully clothed under every available blanket while sharing body warmth for survival. Tom Bradley's expert masonry work suffered the most spectacular failure when extreme temperature differentials caused his chimney stones to crack and separate, allowing frigid air to pour directly into the cabin through gaps in the stonework. Bradley spent 2 days in sub-zero conditions attempting emergency repairs, using clay mortar that froze solid before he could properly set the stones. His family was forced to abandon their cabin on January 18th, seeking shelter with neighbors whose heating systems remained marginally functional. MacLeod's Highland fireplace operated with mechanical precision throughout the crisis, maintaining interior temperatures that never dropped below 58 degrees, even during the coldest nights when exterior temperatures reached minus 22 degrees. The angled firebox continued reflecting 73% of radiant heat into both corner wall masses, storing thermal energy that sustained comfortable living conditions 12 to 14 hours after each evening's fire died to coals. MacLeod's family worked, cooked, and slept in normal clothing while their neighbors struggled to prevent frostbite in their own cabins. The thermal mass system's superiority became mathematically undeniable during the crisis period. MacLeod consumed 1.5 cords of firewood during the entire 23-day period, achieving heating efficiency that his neighbors couldn't match even when burning 4 to 6 cords each. The sandstone walls remained warm to the touch throughout the cabin, creating even heat distribution that eliminated the dangerous cold zones plaguing standard fireplace designs. Where Wright's family huddled within 3 feet of their fireplace to avoid freezing, MacLeod's family enjoyed comfortable temperatures in every corner of their cabin. The physics of MacLeod's success lay in principles his Highland ancestors had perfected during centuries of fuel scarcity and extreme weather. The angled position created convection currents that circulated heated air throughout the cabin's interior, while the massive thermal storage system captured and retained heat energy equivalent to 12 hours of active burning. Standard fireplaces lost 60 to 70% of their heat up the chimney and through inefficient single-wall radiation. but MacLeod's corner design captured thermal energy in over 4,000 pounds of stone that released warmth gradually throughout extended periods without active fire. Community desperation reached critical levels by January 25th as multiple families faced fuel exhaustion and potential death by freezing. Wright calculated that his remaining firewood would last no more than 6 days at current consumption rates, forcing him to burn furniture and structural lumber to maintain minimal heating. Weber's cracked fireplace required constant attention to prevent dangerous smoke accumulation, while his family's cold-related health problems worsened daily. 2 elderly residents, the Hendersons, developed severe frostbite symptoms that threatened to require amputation if conditions didn't improve. The contrast between survival and crisis became starkly visible across the settlement. While MacLeod's cabin showed clear windows and steady smoke from efficient combustion, his neighbors' cabins displayed the signs of heating system failure, ice-covered windows, irregular smoke from desperate fuel burning, and the constant activity of families struggling to maintain life-sustaining warmth. MacLeod's son James documented interior temperatures using his father's Highland knowledge, recording consistent readings between 62 and 68 degrees, while neighbors reported interior temperatures ranging from 28 to 35 degrees during the coldest periods. The mechanical principles behind MacLeod's thermal advantage became a matter of life and death interest to families facing fuel exhaustion. MacLeod explained to Wright how the angled firebox position created superior draft that burned wood more completely, extracting maximum heat energy from each piece of fuel. The corner placement allowed radiant heat to warm 2 wall masses simultaneously, storing thermal energy that standard single-wall designs couldn't capture. Most critically, the massive stone construction provided heat retention that sustained comfortable temperatures throughout the night, eliminating the need for constant fire maintenance that was exhausting Wright's fuel supply. By the 23rd day of sustained sub-zero temperatures, 3 families had been forced to abandon their cabins entirely, their heating systems having failed completely under conditions that MacLeod's Highland design handled with mechanical reliability. The crisis had transformed MacLeod from village eccentric to potential lifesaver, as families faced the reality that their dismissal of primitive Highland techniques might have condemned them to death by freezing in the Kentucky wilderness. Samuel Wright swallowed 12 years of frontier pride when he approached MacLeod's cabin on January 26th, his breath forming ice crystals in the minus 15-degree air. Wright's own cabin had become uninhabitable after his wall-mounted fireplace cracked its hearthstone, allowing frigid air to pour through gaps that his emergency clay repairs couldn't seal. Behind Wright trudged his wife Sarah and their 3 children, carrying blankets and what remained of their food supplies. "Duncan," Wright called through the door, his voice tight with desperation and humiliation. "We need shelter." "Our fireplace failed, and we're freezing." MacLeod opened his door to reveal an interior so warm that steam rose from the Wright family's clothing as they stepped inside. The contrast struck Wright like a physical blow. His own cabin's interior temperature had dropped to 22 degrees, despite burning furniture for fuel, while MacLeod's 16 by 20 foot space maintained the comfortable warmth of a spring morning. "Come in, all of you," MacLeod said simply, though Wright knew the Scotsman was calculating how to house and feed 9 people in a space designed for 4. Klaus Weber arrived 3 hours later with his pregnant wife Maria and their 2 young children, Maria's condition having deteriorated dangerously in their freezing cabin. Weber's limestone fireplace had suffered complete structural failure, with major cracks allowing wind to howl directly through the stonework. Maria's fingers showed clear signs of frostbite, and Weber feared for both her health and their unborn child's survival. MacLeod's cabin now sheltered 14 people, yet the Highland fireplace continued maintaining interior temperatures between 62 and 68 degrees, without any sign of strain or fuel increase. The thermal dynamics that made this possible fascinated Wright, despite his desperate circumstances. MacLeod used the crisis as an opportunity to demonstrate Highland engineering principles, showing Wright how the angled firebox created convection currents that distributed heated air throughout the cabin's entire volume. "Watch the air move," MacLeod instructed, holding up a piece of dried grass that bent and swayed in invisible currents. Corner position pulls cold air down from ceiling, pushes warm air up from floor. Standard fireplace heats one spot, leaves dead air everywhere else. MacLeod guided Wright's hand to different sections of the stone thermal mass, demonstrating heat retention at various distances from the firebox. 8 hours after banking the evening coals, the sandstone walls remained noticeably warm 12 feet from the fireplace, a phenomenon Wright had never experienced with his wall-mounted design. 4,000 pounds of stone holds heat like a mountain holds snow, MacLeod explained. Takes heat slow, gives it back slower. Your fireplace heats fast and loses fast because stone mass is too small and sits wrong. The mathematical precision of MacLeod's system became clear through Wright's direct observation. During active burning, the angled firebox reflected radiant heat simultaneously into both corner walls, creating dual thermal storage that captured energy standard designs lost up the chimney. The corner draft effect pulled air through the fireplace with 15% better efficiency than Wright's wall-mounted design, burning wood more completely and extracting maximum heat from each piece of fuel. Most remarkably, MacLeod's cabin maintained even temperatures throughout its interior, eliminating the dangerous cold zones that had made Wright's cabin uninhabitable. Tom Bradley arrived on January 29th, his professional pride shattered along with his chimney stones. The region's recognized masonry expert had been forced to abandon his own cabin when structural failures made his fireplace not just ineffective, but actively dangerous, filling his living space with smoke while providing virtually no heat. Bradley studied MacLeod's intact stonework with the eye of a craftsman recognizing superior technique. "I built 63 fireplaces in this region," Bradley admitted to MacLeod while examining the angled construction. "And I never understood thermal mass like this. How'd you know to extend the stone 18 inches into both walls?" MacLeod shared the Highland knowledge his father had passed down through 3 centuries of Scottish winter survival. Stone selection required understanding thermal retention properties. Sandstone held heat 40% longer than the limestone most American builders preferred. Mortar mixing demanded specific clay-to-sand ratios that expanded and contracted with temperature changes without cracking. The angled positioning followed mathematical calculations for optimal heat reflection that Highland masons had refined through generations of fuel scarcity and brutal weather. "In Sutherland, we built for survival, not speed," MacLeod told Bradley. "Every stone had to earn its place, or families died." The knowledge transfer continued throughout the crisis as MacLeod taught his desperate neighbors the principles they dismissed as primitive. Wright sketched the angled fireplace design, calculating stone requirements and construction techniques for rebuilding his own heating system. Weber learned to identify thermal mass stones by weight and density, understanding why his limestone had failed under extreme temperature stress. Bradley discovered that his expertise had missed fundamental thermal dynamics that Highland builders considered basic knowledge. MacLeod's heating efficiency during the shelter period astounded his guests. With 14 people generating body heat and moisture, many heating systems would have struggled with ventilation and fuel consumption problems. But MacLeod's design handled the increased load without requiring additional firewood, maintaining comfortable temperatures while efficiently managing air quality through superior draft characteristics. The cabin used 2 2/10 cords of firewood during the entire 23-day crisis period, less fuel than Wright's family alone had burned in their failed cabin during the first 10 days of extreme cold. The survival statistics told the story of engineering triumph over frontier assumptions. MacLeod's Highland fireplace had successfully heated 480 square feet of living space for 14 people, maintaining temperatures that allowed normal daily activities while neighbors faced life-threatening conditions in their own cabins. Standard fireplaces in the settlement averaged heating coverage of 180 square feet with dangerous temperature variations requiring families to huddle near the fire for survival, while peripheral areas dropped below freezing. Maria Weber gave birth to a healthy son on February 2nd, delivered in the warm safety of MacLeod's cabin while her own home remained uninhabitable. The infant's survival represented more than personal joy. It demonstrated how Highland thermal engineering had provided life-sustaining conditions that standard American heating methods couldn't match. Wright later calculated that MacLeod's fireplace had saved at least 4 lives during the crisis, possibly more if the extreme cold had continued beyond 23 days. As February brought the first signs of temperature moderation, Wright faced the humbling reality that his 12 years of frontier building experience had been fundamentally flawed. MacLeod's strange Highland methods hadn't just proven superior, they'd proven essential for survival under conditions that revealed the inadequacy of standard American frontier heating techniques. March brought the first sustained thaw to Cumberland Gap, and with it came Samuel Wright's public acknowledgement that Duncan MacLeod's Highland techniques represented superior engineering rather than foreign eccentricity. Wright began dismantling his cracked wall-mounted fireplace on March 8th, salvaging usable stones while discarding the limestone that had failed under extreme temperature stress. His reconstruction followed MacLeod's precise specifications: angled firebox at 45 degrees to both corner walls, thermal mass extending 18 inches into adjacent walls, and over 3,000 pounds of carefully selected sandstone positioned to maximize heat storage and distribution. Klaus Weber contracted MacLeod to build fireplaces for 2 expanding settlement families, the Pattersons and the O'Briens, who had witnessed the Highland design's performance during the crisis and refused to risk another winter with standard heating methods. Weber's own fireplace reconstruction incorporated MacLeod's stone selection principles and mortar formulations, though Weber chose a hybrid approach that maintained some German timber framing techniques while adopting Highland thermal mass engineering. The construction projects provided MacLeod with his first income from building knowledge that neighbors had initially dismissed as wasteful and primitive. Tom Bradley experienced the most dramatic professional transformation, publicly crediting MacLeod with teaching him thermal dynamics, principles that his 6 years of regional masonry experience had never encountered. "I thought I knew stone and heat," Bradley announced at the settlement's March gathering. "But this Highland mason showed me I was building pretty fireplaces that couldn't heat worth a damn. Every fireplace I build from now on follows Duncan's angle and thermal mass design." Bradley's endorsement carried significant weight throughout 3 counties, where his reputation as the region's expert mason had influenced dozens of construction projects. The techniques spread accelerated through Scottish immigrant networks that extended across Appalachian settlements in Tennessee, Virginia, and North Carolina. MacLeod's cousin Robert, who'd settled near Asheville, received detailed construction drawings and material specifications through spring correspondence. Beginning the Highland fireplace's migration through mountain communities where fuel efficiency and heating reliability meant survival. By late 1885, 17 cabins within 50 miles of Cumberland Gap incorporated MacLeod's angled corner design, with construction requests arriving from settlements MacLeod had never visited. Settlement Council recognition came in April, when local officials asked MacLeod to oversee all future fireplace construction in the Cumberland Gap region, acknowledging that his Highland methods had prevented multiple deaths during the January crisis. The appointment carried both authority and responsibility. MacLeod would inspect and approve fireplace designs before construction began, ensuring that families wouldn't face another winter with heating systems inadequate for extreme weather. His first official project involved redesigning the settlement's planned community building, replacing the architect's standard central fireplace with 2 angled corner units that could heat the larger space efficiently. Wood dealers began reporting significant changes in regional fuel consumption patterns by summer 1886. Firewood sales to Cumberland Gap area settlements had dropped 35% compared to pre-MacLeod averages, representing thousands of cords of timber that families no longer needed for winter survival. The economic impact extended beyond individual savings. Reduced fuel demand lowered wood prices throughout the region while freeing up timber for construction projects that had been delayed by heating fuel requirements. MacLeod's documentation practices, learned through Highland tradition, preserved construction details that would prove invaluable to future generations. His son James maintained detailed records of fireplace specifications, thermal performance measurements, and fuel consumption data, creating an engineering database that tracked Highland heating methods under American frontier conditions. The records included stone selection criteria, mortar mix ratios adapted to Kentucky clay deposits, and seasonal performance comparisons that demonstrated consistent superiority over standard frontier designs. The technique's validation came through measurable results that impressed even skeptical builders from distant settlements. MacLeod's original fireplace, now in its second year of operation, continued demonstrating 18 to 22 degree temperature advantages over standard designs while consuming 40% less firewood than wall-mounted systems. Winter 1886 through 1887 provided additional testing opportunities as temperatures dropped to -12 degrees for extended periods, conditions that MacLeod's Highland design handled without difficulty, while standard fireplaces throughout the region struggled to maintain life-sustaining heat. Regional building costs dropped $15 to $30 per cabin as Highland thermal efficiency reduced firewood preparation requirements and eliminated the need for emergency heating modifications that frontier families had previously considered essential winter preparations. The savings represented significant economic relief for settlers operating on subsistence budgets, allowing families to invest resources in livestock, land improvements, and agricultural expansion rather than excessive fuel preparation. Modern thermal engineering research conducted by the Appalachian Heritage Foundation in 1976 confirmed MacLeod's empirical results through controlled testing of reconstructed Highland fireplace designs. Foundation researchers built replica MacLeod fireplaces using original specifications and materials, measuring thermal performance against period-standard heating systems under laboratory conditions. The testing documented 2.8 times greater heating efficiency, consistent temperature advantages of 18 to 22 degrees, and heat retention equivalent to 8 to 12 hours of active fire, results that validated Highland engineering principles through contemporary scientific methods. Archaeological evidence preserved at MacLeod's original Cumberland Gap site provides physical documentation of Highland construction techniques adapted to American frontier conditions. The Kentucky Historical Society maintains the original cabin and fireplace, where visitors can examine MacLeod's mason marks carved into sandstone blocks, thermal mass integration extending precisely 18 inches into corner walls, and firebox angles that demonstrate mathematical precision achieved through traditional craftsmanship. The site represents one of the few intact examples of Highland thermal engineering applied to American frontier architecture. Contemporary passive solar and earth-sheltered home construction employ thermal mass principles identical to those MacLeod applied in 1884, positioning heat sources at angles that maximize thermal storage while minimizing fuel consumption. Modern heating engineers recognize Highland building techniques as sophisticated thermal engineering that achieved energy efficiency through traditional knowledge rather than technological innovation. MacLeod's primitive corner fireplace anticipated by over a century the energy-conscious building methods that contemporary builders consider advanced environmental design. The ultimate vindication of MacLeod's Highland techniques came through survival statistics that demonstrated the life-saving value of traditional knowledge applied to frontier conditions. Winter 1884 through 1885 killed 31 people across 3 Kentucky counties due to inadequate heating, but thermal engineering analysis suggests that Highland fireplace designs, had they been widely adopted, could have prevented 80% of those deaths through superior heat retention and fuel efficiency. MacLeod's strange corner fireplace hadn't just challenged frontier building assumptions. It had proven that dismissing traditional knowledge as primitive often revealed not their ignorance, but our own.